So I'd had this idea for this show, and the premise being that Zeus had a midlife crisis.
Welcome to Lesche, a podcast on new ideas in ancient Greek studies. I'm your host, Johanna Hanning, and I'm a classicist at Brown University. This is a special bonus episode of the podcast. The podcast is mostly dedicated to new academic work on ancient Greece. But this episode is just so different and so exciting that I wanted to get it out right away and give it a special frame. At the end of August, a hugely exciting new show premiered on Netflix. That show is Kaos, a modern dark dramedy that sets intertwined stories out of Greek mythology in something like the modern world. Starring Jeff Goldblum as a neurotic, erratic, tracksuit-wearing Zeus, the lead among a star-studded cast of characters, Kaos follows the stories of three mortals drawn from three different sets of Greek myths: Ari, or Ariadne, Ridi, or Eurydice, and Caeneis. Their threads of fate are interwoven, and together they threaten to bring down the rule of the Olympian gods. Each of these mortals was born with the same cryptic prophecy given them by the fates. A line appears, the order wanes, the family falls, and chaos reigns. Their stories take place against the backdrop of Olympus, where the world's most famous dysfunctional family, the family of the Olympian gods, is embroiled again in their own struggles, and beginning to reckon with the prophecy's consequences for Zeus's rule. This is not your Edith Hamilton or D'Aulaire's version of the Greek myths. It's dark, it's edgy, it's funny, it's diverse and inclusive, it's both heartbreaking and uplifting, and it's just really, really good. I won't say much more here because I want to get right to my conversation with my guest for this episode, the show's creator and showrunner, Charlie Covell. If you're a fan of the show, you'll definitely want to hear this, and if you haven't seen the show yet, I hope that it inspires you to treat yourself to a binge. We'll be discussing Charlie's longstanding interest in myth, their earlier creative work inspired by it, the process of developing the show for Netflix, and the ongoing value and thrill of creating new versions of Greek mythology. And Charlie also mentions a couple of deleted scenes, so you definitely won't want to miss this. There are, I should warn everyone, spoilers, and there's also a little bit of colorful language, so you might just want to listen to this one out of the kids' earshot. And lastly, just a quick promotional note. I imagine that this episode might be drawing some listeners from outside this podcast's usual demographic. And if you're a first-time listener, welcome. I'd love it if you became a regular. You can follow the podcast on Instagram @Lesche Podcast. And of course, it'd be great if you subscribed and left a review so that other fans of Greek antiquity can find the Lesche more easily. So now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome into the Lesche Charlie Covell, creator of the hit Netflix show Kaos. The next voice you'll be hearing is theirs.
So my interest in Greek mythology, I am told by my parents, was, I think I was 4, and I became obsessed with they had a VHS of the 1981 Clash of the Titans film. And apparently, and they've said this for a long time, apparently I would watch it kind of weekly, sometimes daily, and I was just obsessed with it. So that was, I think, my first kind of intro into the stories. And then I had some children's books of myths that, again, I was very nerdy and obsessed by, and I had them on audio cassette as well, so I'd read the book and then I'd listen to it in the car with them. I think they got quite fed up a couple of years in, but then and then as I got older, I think I read the Roger Lenkin Green Tale of Troy when I was a kind of young teenager, and then when I was older and I studied English, but there was lots of classical connection there. So and I studied theatre studies for A-level. So reading the kind of myths in their original, not the original Greek, but in original translations, and then I became really, really switched on by modern reinterpretations of the myths. So there was that Canongate series of novels like the Penelopiad by Margaret Atwood and Wait by Jeanette Winterson, and I just adored those. And then Carol Ann Duffy did a poetry anthology called The World's Wife, and her poem of Orpheus and Eurydice was a big influence on me for Orpheus and Eurydice. I mean, it's not entirely the same, but But yeah, it was the Clash of the Titans film that got me in.
I've read that you began your own creative work with Greek mythology by writing a short play about Clytemnestra.
I did, yes, and it was called Asphodel. So I think I'd said to a friend who was an actor, I wanted to write. I had some ideas, and he said, "We're kind of putting together this kind of theatre company. Would you want to write a short play?" And I kind of went, "Yes, I'd love to." And I don't think there were any themes, or you could be about anything. And so I wrote this 10-minute play about Clytemnestra being processed in the underworld, and the underworld was this kind of just this dusty bureaucratic shithole, basically. And there was this faceless underworld worker, and Clytemnestra was sitting there, and I think she was wearing this incredible kind of ball gown, and she'd been crying, she had this mascara down her face, and she was telling the story of Agamemnon sacrificing Iphigenia to go to Troy, and it was basically a monologue at this worker, telling him about her life and what had happened after that, leading up to her death. And then you realize that she's kind of on a loop, because the conceit in the play was that he has this pill called Lethe, and the idea is that she has to take the pill before she can go through into the underworld and forget her life, and that's the way they kind of controlled the dead in this version of the play I was writing. And she refused to take it, so she'd just been telling him this story for years, and you realize that he was kind of losing his mind. So that was the first thing I wrote, and then I enjoyed that kind of conceit. So with the same company, I wrote lots of short plays, taking these mythological figures and putting them in the underworld. And I don't really know why. It just kind of, I don't know what the thought process was, but I loved writing them. Yeah. And so lots of the ideas and characters. I did a play about Orpheus and Eurydice, and he was kind of a pain in the ass, and he was, not stalking her, but she definitely preferred being in the underworld than being at home with him. So that was kind of, like I said, that was influenced by the Caroline Duffy poem massively. And I had Cara on the boat. I think it was a boat woman, actually, which I'm sure people would have objected to. And she just sat in her boat eating crisps and was kind of irritated when she had to row over anyone across. So it was I guess it was taking these classical figures and then putting them in a world where there was this kind of deadpan humor, and it didn't matter how grand the characters were. They were just in this kind of this bureaucratic kind of shoddy place, I guess. But yeah, that was 2009, I think.
Well, I have to say that this is one of my absolute favorite lines from Kaos, is when Orpheus has already arrived in the underworld and they're there in front of Medusa discussing really going back.
Yeah.
And she says she doesn't want to go back, and he says why, and she says, because I have a job here. It's like it's the best. Do you remember, though, if you think back to it, what drew you to the character of Clytemnestra, why she was the springboard for this line of creativity?
I think her story always really haunted me. The idea that he just killed their kid, and she had to kind of just like, oh, well, that's it. And I don't know. I wanted to tell something from her perspective entirely. And I can find it and send it to you if you want. I mean, I don't know if it's any good, but I've still got it somewhere. I'll read it. If it's any good, I'll send it. If not, I would
love it. You should have people perform that now. I mean, people would love to do that. Well, you were talking about how already in Clytemnestra, you have, you've already embarked in a way on this world building where you have this image of, or this setting of this Kafkaesque underworld, this bureaucratic nightmare of a place. Is that is that still really the same setting for Kaos, or did that evolve, or is that pretty much one of the things that came to you first?
No, I always found, I like the idea that the underworld was just a kind of, it was pen pushers, and the idea of Asphodel being not quite a purgatory, but it wasn't the Asphodel Meadow. It wasn't something. It was like almost like a holding place. And I mean, I don't know why it was like that in my mind. The idea that they were kind of, everyone was being organized, but that it was badly run. I don't know why I kind of came up with that idea, but I think it helped with the juxtaposition of the grandiosity of the myths. And I think there's something about putting them in that setting, I guess. And so, yeah, that was kept. I remember the first draft that I wrote, back in 2018 of Kaos, Medusa was trying to make a projector work, and she was like, the fucking remote doesn't, and she had this kind of, and the key fob didn't work, and she was like, fuck's sake, and Caeneis is there, like, what, because the first draft was very different, but the underworld was always quite clear in my head, and obviously rendered brilliantly by Georgie and Raniero, the directors, but that, yeah, the kind of feel of it was always clear to me, I think.
Yeah, those early scenes of the turnstiles and the crowd control and the wonderful way that you add in then Cerberus as a part of that bureaucracy and processing.
Cerberus, the thing I was most, I mean, I don't know if I should say this, but we had, because in the scripts you had the original Cerberus who just slept in Hades' office all the time, this old, like, grey muzzled dog. And he was in the drafts for so long. And then we had a conversation that the dog had cost, I don't know what it cost. They were like, does he need to have the original Cerberus? I was like, absolutely. That is something that's a non-negotiable. Got talked out of it quite quickly, but it was but yeah, so so the Cerberuses, I think that was in a very early draft that you kind of met Caeneis with his dog, and that was kind of a reveal. We slightly re-edited it in the finished version, but in episode 2 you used to go in with Caeneis and then see the dog as a pet, and then realize he was a working dog, but for various reasons we just moved that about a bit.
Well, I have to say that as a dog lover, the striking thing about the Cerberuses is that they have 3 heads but are still really cute. I mean, you would kind of think that would be gross, but they're actually very cute.
They are really cute, and they had they were this incredible VFX company, and I think it was the same company that were looking at it. They were kind of developing it in the pandemic, because I think and they sent this again. I think I can probably find the video and send it to you. This making of Fotis and what kind of dog skeletally, if that's a word, would be best to make it look not frightening but still, and there's certain shapes of and breeds of dog where you could kind of fit 3 heads and 3 necks, and some dogs where there would be no way you could do that without it being terrifying. But with the way VFX works, it comes together so late in the sense that of the finished product. So it's like the last 2% made Fotis cute. Before that, we were kind of going, he's terrifying. I mean, this dog's meant to be adorable, but I think we're going to have to kiss goodbye to that and just go, okay, he's a terrifying, terrifying demon dog. And Neil, our VFX supervisor, was like, I promise you the dog will be cute in a week. And we were like, well, you tell us that, Neil. And he was absolutely right.
Well, it just makes that scene then when Caeneis says, his name is Fotis, it means light. It's just so heartrending because the dog is really so sweet. Well, can I ask you, this is one of the things that I've been curious about from the absolute get-go, from just seeing the trailers, is how did you frame the pitch for this? What did the pitch process look like? Well,
it looked quite unusual, I think, probably we pitched in the US in 2018, and because there were so many characters, and if you're not au fait with Greek mythology, the names can be really, I think they can be a bit alienating. I also think sometimes people use the classics as a way to make other people feel stupid. So they kind of drop a reference in, and it can feel like it's not a story for me if you don't know the world. And I always wanted, because I'd loved the myth so much, and I came to them through pop culture, as I said, and I always wanted them to feel, this show to feel accessible, and that you didn't have to do homework to get it. But I also wanted people who love the myths and are nerdy like me to like it. So I was hoping it would work on those 2 levels. So the pitch was, I'd just done End of the Fucking World. So I'm assuming I can swear on this, but I didn't ask you.
It's
okay. Like
antiquity, it's full of material that's not for children. So
okay, fine. But so good. But I'd just done End of the Fucking World, and it had done well on Netflix, and I'd had this idea for this show, and the premise being that Zeus had a midlife crisis. That was the germ of thought for the show. But I had all these characters from like I was telling you, the plays from, 9 years ago at that point. And I had all these ideas. So I said, well, the show I really want to do is this thing about Greek mythology, and Zeus is kind of the head of this family, and what he experiences is felt by the humans on Earth. And obviously the story wasn't fleshed out, but I went and pitched it. But I made this kind of, and I feel insane talking about it now, but it was like I got a big sheet of cardboard. Nina Liederman, who's our American exec, said, well, we went to Target or something. She's like, just buy a big sheet of cardboard, and we cut out pictures of actors who we thought might be, good in, like, a good reference for the roles. So we just made a family tree of gods and humans, and had this board that I took around LA with me to pitch it. And I guess the way to pitch it was kind of like I've just said to you, it's doing something with, like, to my mind, the most incredible IP, which is the Greek myths, and everybody loves IP, I'm told. So, and just saying, these are the stories that all stories are based on. I want to do a kind of contemporary other retelling. It should feel like you're going into Baz Luhrmann's Verona when we go into Earth, and the gods live in this kind of sterile, beautiful paradise, but they're kind of bored, and everyone wants to come to Earth, and the underworld is this kind of, this bureaucratic, as you say, Kafkaesque nightmare. And these are the greatest stories ever, and we should make a TV show about it. I mean, it was more thought out than that as a pitch, but I think talked about how amazing the source material is, and then also mentioned all the retellings and adaptations that I'd loved and how accessible they felt. And I guess that was the way in, I think.
What kind of questions did you get?
I think how would you tie the stories together? So, because obviously, and at one point, I mean, I was thinking, would this be better as an anthology piece? Is it better to do a kind of myth of the week? Because there's a world in which you could do that, but I don't think you'd kind of necessarily be able to reinvent as much. I think it was by connecting the stories that we were able to make the reinvention work in a more muscular way. And that was not just me, that was working with these incredible producers and story producers. Because I think I'm kind of good at the ideas and the characters. I'm not so great at plot always. So I do need people kind of forcing me to collide things and make sure this action has this consequence, and how are the worlds all speaking to each other. So that was not something I did on my own by any stretch. But yeah, I mean, so how would we connect? How would we focus? How would it not feel too big that people just got lost? So there were so many more characters when I first came up with the idea that we had to just reduce and reduce and reduce and reduce. And there's a whole kind of, there are reams of pages and scripts and ideas of other characters. So if we were to do more, there's a lot to draw on, because there was a lot I had to lose, some of which was very regretfully, but it had to happen to make the story more coherent, I think. And I've talked to a lot of people about the show, and I think people feel that even if they enjoy 1 and 2, they're getting their head in gear, and they're kind of going, okay, it's a lot of intros, I'm trying to get my head around the world and the characters. And then people say the pattern seems to be that by episode 3 they're kind of in, and that's a more singular story. It's telling us about a day we've already seen. It sort of brings everyone up to speed. And so I think we would just, and what I learned was you have to limit how many introductions you're doing for people, because there's so much going on. And if you know, then great. But if you don't, I think you can go, my God, I just feel completely disorientated by this.
Yeah, that's the usual reaction that students get in, Greek mythology classes, or it's when I hear all the time when students read the Iliad for the first time, is there's so many names, what do I, but I think that one of the really incredible things about this show is that by the end of it, you feel like you know so many characters so well. And it's extraordinary the way that there are so many plots intertwined. So the plots of the 3 mortals whose destinies are intertwined through the prophecy, but then all of these dynamics that are going on with the Olympian gods. I mean, there's just so much that comes together, and it seems all very organic, the way that you get to know so many of them so well.
Well, I'm so pleased you think that. I mean, that was the hope, but we've been in the edit for about 18 months, so you do feel it. You do feel at one point you think, does this make sense to anybody else? I hope so. But yeah, I mean, the team I worked with they are incredible storytellers, and they've made so many great shows. And I think they just made Chernobyl when I started working with them. So they're phenomenal at kind of going, you don't need this is important. Okay, link this here. And then you suddenly can see it and you go, oh yeah, that link. And also links often are always there, but I hadn't picked them out, if that makes sense. So it's kind of highlighting connections that I think were a bit too dormant probably.
Well, I think I have a better grasp now on why you chose the Orpheus and Eurydice myth as part of this. But I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about your choice in particular of the Cretan myths and Crete as the mortal setting for the story as it unfolds. I would love to hear more about that. And I would also love to hear more about the framing device of Prometheus.
So in terms of Crete, because we were focusing on, at one point there were going to be multiple human rulers on Earth we were focusing on. And again, it just became something that was like, this is too much. And I think if we have one human ruler, Minos, that we're focusing on, and we make that the kind of focal point of the human stories, it will feel like we're we're in one place. So that was, and so the fact that we were looking at that ruler, that city, because we knew we wanted to tell the story, our version of the Minotaur and of Ariadne. So that's where the human beating heart had to be. So yeah, Crete was the center of the earth in that sense. And I think, am I right in thinking, is Knossos one of the seven wonders of the world? Have I got that right, or is it not?
I don't know if it's on the canonical list, but in any case, it's certainly one of the, the labyrinth is the big kind of, those famous machines of, I mean,
yeah. So I don't know, but it's but it feels such a kind of important and iconic thing in classical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
In the canon, like you say. So I think that felt. I mean, there were obviously lots you could choose from, but in terms of the stories we were going to tell and how they connected, that felt key. So we kind of wrapped the other human stories around that central place. And then in terms of Prometheus, it's funny. I'd always, him being the narrator just felt, because Prometheus to me, or not just to me, to lots of people, he's the champion of humanity, and obviously his name means foresight. It's the idea that he was speaking to the humans and guiding the humans through this story. And he's also kind of a Greek chorus as well, because he's reacting to stuff. It felt like that was both fun, and I think because Stephen's such an amazing actor, he was able to do essential exposition, which helped people just, anchor themselves and held their hand. But he's so comedic and he's so sharp. So I think he was very good at making that exposition feel fun and playful in his delivery. And I think the relationship was, being able to go from sitting with Zeus to looking at the camera felt like a kind of almost like a theatrical device, as has been done on shows like Fleabag and Chewing Gum. So it's not like it's anything new, but it felt like for this that it would be great to have access into him. And then I suppose also as the show goes on, I quite like that you start to question whether he's a reliable narrator. Like, can you trust him? Should you trust him? Because he's tricky. One of his things is that he cheats and he tricks people. So then as the audience, you maybe start going, oh, should I trust him? And should we,
Yeah, you definitely start wondering, like, what's this guy's angle?
Yeah. And I think when you realize, when you see him murder Charon, you think, even though you know why he does it, it's like, fuck, he still did it. So I think, you're kind of hopefully starting to just maybe question him a little bit and not just assuming he's on the side of right. And there is obviously such an enormous ego there with him. And he is kind of going head to head with Zeus. And I think, and by the end, you're thinking this is macro, but it's also very personal for Prometheus.
Well, that's so interesting what you say about him also performing this function of, in a way, a Greek tragic chorus, doing not only the exposition, but also some of the interpretive work, holding our hands through that too. It's like sort of like, well, what did you just see? Let me explain to you what you just saw here.
Yeah.
That was incredibly effective. And then also just in that way that one sometimes wonders about how reliable the narratives of the tragic choruses are, just as in the same way.
But I think maybe that was, and I was probably influenced, well, I'm sure I know I was, because in the Penelope, I think I remember that they have the 12 of Odysseus makes him kill them. And these are women who've raised him, I think, if I'm right. And so they, in the book, I think from memory, they function as a chorus, but they've got so much skin in the game. And I think as a kind of framing device that is also, they're in the story, they're not neutral. So I'm sure that definitely was an influence in terms of how we were constructing the Prometheus of it all.
So with the whole Prometheus, in terms of what skin in the game he has, right? We hear in Prometheus Bound, right? This is a sort of essential kernel of Greek mythology that there will be a day that Zeus is overturned. There will be a day that the family falls and chaos reigns. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit about how you came to your cosmology. There's a first-year grad student at Brown, Meg, who was particularly interested in the fates and this question of, are the fates more powerful than Zeus? Even though he might be able to kill their corporeal selves, do they still have some power over him? What is the role of prophecy? That this is something that even its power extends, the gods are subject to it themselves. Could you say just a little bit about, how you were sort of understanding this broader cosmology or how you were creating it?
So if Meg, thank you for your question. And I think how to explain this without being too waffly. So I would say that we reveal in episode 1 that Zeus was once a human. So the idea that this kind of these myths, this faith, this religion has been cultivated by Zeus and Hera and the family. And we've got Prometheus saying, "You write the narrative, you create the myths," and at the end, Persephone says to Hera, like, "Why the story?" So there's this idea that there's kind of been, history's written by the winners kind of thing. So I was interested in the idea that the myths themselves are subjective depending on who's written them, and I suppose that's in the reinterpretations that I love. It's when writers have taken a character that doesn't have much autonomy or maybe is a tiny kind of footnote and makes them into a bigger story. That was always really exciting to me. So I suppose it was in that sense of, well, who's writing the story and who's the protagonist and all that kind of stuff. And so if we go along with this, that Zeus was once human and created these myths in order to kind of shore up his power, the Fates and the Furies have always existed beyond Zeus. So even though he is now all powerful, he hopes, there is a sense that there are kind of forces beyond him. And Hades says in episode 6, he says there are forces beyond us, whether you like it or not. And so I think what Zeus is terrified of is that there was something before him and there may be something after him. And that's what kind of plagues him. And with the prophecy, I think, that's such a classical tradition, isn't it? That you can't outrun your fate. You can't avoid prophecy. And even if you're Zeus, can you avoid it? And I think with what I found interesting about writing Kaos and doing the prophecy strand was there are points at which you go, if Zeus hadn't behaved as he does, it wouldn't have happened. He kind of does bring it into being. There's so many points at which he could stop it and he can't. And I remember that. Do you remember in the first Matrix film when Neo goes to the Oracle, and she says, "Oh, mind the vase," and he goes, "What vase?" and turns around, and she's like, "Oh, what's going to really bother you is that did you?" And I thought, and that's why I was talking to Jeff about that. I think that's the kind of the feeling with the prophecy. If he just left it alone, and the Fates say it to him, they say it only exists if you believe in it, and the problem is that Zeus believes in this thing that's going to destroy him. So is it? How much of it is kind of from him bringing it into being, and how much is just it's inevitable? And I don't think the two things are mutually exclusive.
Well, it just seems that prophecy is such a cornerstone of the whole Greek mythological construct, and it's just so exciting to see. Even when or you have a hunch that these prophecies still will be fulfilled. I found myself with Ariadne and the Minotaur and Minos wondering, well, how is this, somehow going to still be fulfilled despite the whole plot setup? And I love this idea, too, that thinking back to your bureaucratic Hades, that this whole Olympian rule, this whole Olympian regime is itself very bureaucratic. I love this idea that everybody is issued with a prophecy at birth, like a social security card. Or you just get yours.
We had this conceit, I think it was in an early draft, that you get them from vending machines when you came of age. So these vending machines all over the world. And there was this very expensive scene in episode 8 where when the cave exploded, every vending machine in the world also blew up. The cost of that, but also, as someone pointed out, was that, but hang on, is this just how prophecies kind of come into being now, or how would they have come into the past? I missed the vending machines. I thought it was very cool, and people go and get their prophecy when their parents take them when they come of age and stuff. I love that as a conceit, but it was it was going to be complicated,
like getting your draft card.
Yeah.
Could you say a little bit more about your Hera? Because Hera, among the people in classics who I've spoken to, who I've read, people are really loving your take on Hera. And could you just say a little bit about how you got to that character?
Well, I think it was, I just felt that I just can't bear the idea that she's just a jealous wife of Zeus. She's queen of the gods, and I felt there was, I don't know, I felt slightly like she's always in a sentence with Zeus. I can't think of many times when I've read or seen something that's just about her on her own and what she might want and how she is as an individual. And I think I'd written three or four episodes when we got Janet on board. And I've seen Janet on stage and in TV and film for years. I'm such a fan of hers. And I think it was actually talking to Janet and just hearing her voice. I mean, that also, whenever you cast someone, you've still got episodes to write, I find it so thrilling because you then have the character, their voice in your head. And Hera was so much easier to write and finesse those earlier episodes, knowing that it would be Janet playing her, because she's so extraordinary. And she brings that classical heft to the role just naturally, I think. So it was important that she, I didn't like the idea that he just, he plays around all the time and she just sits being jealous. And so I like the idea of them, that they've been married for 2000 plus years. They've been everything, they've done everything, they've fucked everybody. And I like the idea that they have this kind of open relationship, because I mean, my God, why wouldn't you? You're together forever. But the thing that she keeps secret from him is the one thing he couldn't bear, which is that she's shagging his brother. So I think it was just about, just giving her power and autonomy that's hers, and making her not secondary to Zeus, I suppose, that they had to feel like true equal players. So I love that monologue she has in 5 when she says, "We built the world, we did it together." And I think that the anger from Hera, that she's sacrificed everything to basically look after this man who's behaving like a child, and she could be running the world. And I think, if we were to do more, which I hope we do, I'm really excited about where we take Hera next.
Well, I'm almost wondering if there's a little bit of an evolution even from 5 to 6, because there's the "We built the world" in 5, and then in 6, one of the scenes from the show that I just can't shake from my head is when they're getting, or no, it's 7, sorry, when they're getting ready to watch Minos try to overturn the prophecy, and Poseidon calls her darling when Zeus is back. He's like out at the barbecue or whatever. And she says, don't call me darling, not here. And he says, let's run away. And she goes into this thing, she says, "No, this is my house."
Yeah.
It's just really sort of her as Zeus is kind of a joker in a way. It's like, she's like, this is what I've built, and we're.
And I think it's that, I think you could just see, I mean, she's kind of the neck that turns the head, I suppose. But I don't know, I just like the idea that by the end of the series, again, Zeus's actions force her to strike out on her own. Because I think ultimately she's probably Zeus's most dangerous nemesis.
Well, could I also ask about another person who's usually relegated to the wife role, but is a really interesting character in this, is Persephone. And a lot of people have been really interested in, is it in episode 8 where Persephone says it's Hera is the one who's been spreading this notion that she was abducted, she doesn't want to be there. Mm-hmm. And Persephone says, I'm allergic to pomegranates, actually. This kind of conscious rejection of another version of a myth, which you can't get more mythy than that, than to be self-conscious about saying, no, somebody else has gotten it wrong. And in this case, it was really thrilling that person who got it wrong was Hera herself, and that it's almost with malice. So could you say a little bit more about Persephone as this total consummate queen of a bureaucracy?
That's really cool. You think that. I'm thrilled that you do, about the kind of the rejection of a telling of a myth. So Persephone, I guess I didn't. I don't know why. I'd always liked the idea that they had quite a functional marriage and they loved each other, Hades and Persephone, and that he'd been dealt the rubbish card and was stuck in the underworld, making the best of it. And in my head, he just falls for Persephone, she falls for him, and he's kind of surprised and delighted she wants to marry him and be with him and help him run this place. And they have a really kind of, they're the one functional relationship in all the Olympian family, even though she's treated like shit by the rest of them. And I don't know, I guess it felt like, but I don't really know. I don't think I set out to do it on purpose. I just had this idea that, what if they're actually really kind of happy? And there's something threatening to Hera about that, because she doesn't want people to be happy or functional. She kind of, I think there's a sort of, she just wants to force and sow discord. And I kind of like the fact that Persephone and Hades still are there together, despite these kind of awful rumors and people thinking horrendous things of him, and feeling, feeling pity for her, which I don't think she's wild about. But yeah, I don't know why. I just wanted to tell their story like that, and I've been interested to see what people's response has been, because I thought that would really annoy people, but actually loads of classicists have said, like you were just saying very kindly, that's one of the things they've really enjoyed. So yeah, that's been cool to see.
Well, I think that that's in a way where classicists are still going to be doing their kind of smug, like if you really understood sort of thing. It's almost like, people who maybe will have a certain idea of the story of Persephone in their minds and think, oh, no, that's not how it goes. But then that's when your myth teacher is going to come in and say, yeah, but that's exactly the point of myth, is to say that's not how it goes and do a different version.
Listen, I love it. That's the stuff I live for. So if I was,
Well, you and me both. It was just so charming and sweet how Persephone is so no nonsense and sort of marmsy, but then she's just fussing over Hades constantly. Yeah. I mean, it's really adorable.
There's this scene we had to cut. I don't know. I think it just didn't quite work in the end. But there's a really beautiful scene, and it's so well directed and shot, where he's in bed and the scars are still very livid, and she's tending his wounds with meander water, which she says she's like, I nicked it from Mount Olympus. She had this kind of big plastic bottle that she just had the kind of thought in the moment to just grab some and take him back to the underworld. And I do miss that detail, that you saw this really lovely moment between them, and they performed it so well. But yeah, you have to kill your darlings at some point. But
I don't know. I think the world needs like a Netflix Kaos special of the cut scene, deleted scenes with commentary. Well, could I ask a little bit about, as you were fleshing out these stories, besides the modern retellings that you were talking about, you mentioned that you have worked with the primary texts. What are some of the ones that really draw you in? Some of the ones that maybe you keep going back to? What were the primary texts that you were working with for this?
The thing the one I kept coming back to, and I haven't just got it because I'm talking to you, but that's the Metamorphoses, and I think that's where I was reading that when I thought that Kaos would be a good title for the show. And I think, but I think I also got to a point where I'd read so much, and I'd read so many reinterpretations, and then I stopped myself, and I also stopped myself. I haven't for about 5 years read any of I've got them all, like the Natalie Haynes, all those brilliant books, because I was so scared of accidentally taking something that I'd read and putting it into Kaos. So I've kind of like weirdly starved myself of stuff I would have loved to read, so that I didn't accidentally kind of copy it. So now that the show is out, I'm delighted I can go and read all those books that people have given them to me for Christmas and my birthday for a few years, and I can't read them. But maybe I'm being stupid about it. But I had this, I'm nervous about stuff like that. But yeah, I think that would be it. But I did really kind of, because I think I didn't want to feel that we had to be really strict about what, and also which version of the myth do you choose. I think so. I was quite careful to not. I would look things up and go, hang on, this is one interpretation, and the thing that I think, if you're working with people, and it was important I was working with people that didn't all necessarily know the myths very well. I think that was really vital, because you don't want people just geeking out and going, oh yeah, that Easter egg, whatever. You need people going, hang on, if you don't know these at all, this doesn't make sense, and this feels quite alienating. So it was important there was a mix of us. But there was a point where I think there was a series of notes and changes suggested, and I kind of thought at that point, no, there has to be a nod. At the bare minimum, there has to be a nod to the original myth, because otherwise this is just going to be a soap with unusual names. These have to be connected to those myths, because a lot of the people who will hopefully watch this show know them really well. And part of the joy, as you've said, is in going, oh, that's something that kind of they've reinvented, or oh, that's actually exactly the story. So it was a balance, but I wasn't constantly going back to source material. I was kind of almost leaving it and seeing what bubbled up from memory, and having loved those stories for so long. I think the one thing I went back to actually, because was the children's book, the Geraldine McCaughrean myth, which again is somewhere here, but I can't see it. because there's something so pure about those children's stories, and I think and because they're short and they're beautifully written, they're heartfelt, and I suppose there's something kind of uncomplicated about it. And I don't think I used anything in particular, but it was reminding myself of the first time I read these things, I suppose. But yeah, nothing particularly impressively academic or intellectual, I'm afraid.
Well, I think probably all the better for it. Could you say a little bit, you were mentioning Ovid, which is really interesting, the Metamorphoses, which is, seeking to stitch together all mythology, starting from the earliest Greek stories, all the way through Rome. And you insert or you integrate really interesting nods to Roman antiquity. Mm-hmm. Could you say a little bit about that with the particularly, it seems like, in the context of imagining this mythological world as something that is based around organized religion, the Olympians as an organized religion. So the whole vero as a religious gesture, and then the background choral singing. Could you say a little bit about maybe both the nods to Roman antiquity and also the way that those play this role in constructing this as a religious system?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was not yet. I think because I remember when Isa Summers, who's the composer, she first sent us that refrain, the Celestis, and we were all kind of knocked out by it. And I remember someone saying, "Hang on, it's Latin. Like, how do we feel about Latin being in the show?" And I know some people have commented on it and thought it didn't fit because it was based on Greek mythology, the show. But I think it's important that we do have those Roman references and nods, because again, it shows that we're not being strict or puritanical about the sources. And obviously the idea that stories shift and are retold, and then and someone told me, you'll be able to tell me if this is true, I don't know, I hadn't read this, but I was talking to someone about the show, and they said that it was the survivors of Troy who actually created the Roman Empire. Is that true? Was that something that someone kind of...
Yeah, so Aeneas, as a refugee then from Troy, then becoming the arch,
of course,
kind of earliest founder. Yeah, this notion of so many European communities claimed that their founders were descendants or were refugees of Troy after Troy was completely destroyed. Yeah,
of course, yes, I should know that. So I think, and again, because we were kind of... It was to feel contemporary but contemporary other. So that I didn't want it to be that there was a rule where we couldn't mention anything that was Latin or Roman. And for example, the Tacitors, which just, I mean, I don't know why it popped into my head. I think it was probably because of, I read all because they're not in the films, the Hunger Games books. I remember the Avoxes, because obviously Hunger Games is based so much on all the Roman stuff. And so I think, and because the idea kind of came to me, and I was thinking, well, technically this is like a Latin word, and is that okay? And I was like, of course it's okay. I was kind of being really strict with myself in this thing I was inventing, which seemed stupid. So yeah, it started off as something that probably was accidental, and then when we had the conversation about, well, ought we to have Latin and Roman references, it's like, yeah, why not? Because everything influences everything else, and actually this is kind of maybe allowing us to show that we're not being puritanical about it, and also nods to telling and retelling and stories shifting and influences going beyond what the original source material might be, and so it felt kind of a useful nod to that, I guess.
I mean, you're really showing just how generative this is, and this being the point when I teach myth, I have this whole shtick about how myth is like, the mythical tradition is like a rubber band, and so you can always pull tighter on one section and then add in a bunch.
Oh, that's cool. That's great. That's great.
But I love that with the Tacitas, that that's a how does Hera operate, right? That's a place where you can pull on that rubber band and add in all sorts of stuff, add in all sorts of subplots and things like that.
But I think I was definitely worried about, what I was allowed and not allowed to do. And then you think, oh God, I mean, your life's too short. Just do it and see, if it resonates with you, it'll probably resonate with other people, hopefully. And then I was reading this book by Richard Buxton, the Greek myths that shape the way we think, and he talks about them as their thought experiments. They're our way of explaining ourselves to ourselves and each other, and again, that whole thing is like they're there to be retold, and every era you go through, they're still there because they're so innately human. And I think you can press pause at any point in history, and the myths will speak to whatever's going on in the world, because they're just like they're timeless, aren't they? And but the way people interpret those myths, depending on the era you're in, varies hugely. So and it's been interesting. It's been interesting. Some people saying, I think people have been like, this is woke nonsense, and you kind of go, well, we haven't changed things very much, actually. So if you're using woke as a pejorative term, which I'm pretty sure you are, then actually go to the source material and have your problem with that. So I don't know, but maybe that's just me being defensive. I don't know.
No, it completely reminds me of Emily Wilson when she would talk about her Odyssey translation and say, people would say, oh, well, you have erased this part of it. And she's like, well, that's actually misogyny that was only introduced through translations. That I'm going to the original Greek. I was curious about the presence of contemporary Greece in the show, which is really striking. And maybe in a way we could come back also to what you were saying before, the conceit of the Trojan refugees, which is, I think, for a lot of people, really kind of gestures in a way to the refugee crisis in contemporary Greece, that it evoked that for them, the presence of the refugees in the cityscape.
Right.
If you could speak a little bit, maybe you could just say a little bit about the way that the show was inserted into a version of Greek modernity as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, I think with I didn't ever want to, because I started writing this, oh God, so many years ago, and thinking about it. So, and I think people have asked, like, is this about a specific thing in our world now? And truthfully, I mean, I think, like I said, because these stories are timeless, they speak to every era. So, there will always be oppressed people, there will always be refugees, there will always be people in power abusing that power, there'll always be dysfunctional families, war, betrayal, so I didn't want to kind of make things. I'm interested in what people have recognized in our world for them and found connections, and that's amazing, and I'm really pleased with that. But I didn't want to kind of go, it's specifically this, because I think then you can limit maybe the scope of the meaning to somebody else, if that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, I think the idea of the Trojans, I think I wanted to focus on what happened after the war, rather than the war itself. And I've always been, I saw an amazing version of The Women of Troy at the National Theatre, probably like 20 years ago now, because I'm a lot older than I think I am. And the character of Andromache, when they take the baby, I never forgot it. And then I really wanted to write a part for Daniel Monks. My parents seen him in a play at the Donmar, and said, you've got to see this guy, and I did, and he was just incredible. And then we kind of changed the story slightly so that Astyanax had survived the fall, was being kept secret as this hope for the Trojans who'd survived the war. But ultimately, I always knew that Andromache was going to lose him again. And yeah, I don't know that I'm answering your question. You asked about modern Greece. But yeah, it was just trying to make these stories feel as contemporary as possible, I suppose. So putting, like I say, age-old crises, conflicts, but transposing them in a way. And, again, the directors were so fantastic at making it feel like it was urgent and relevant to our world now, by the look of it, by the locations, by the cast. Because I think a lot of people hear Greek mythology and they think togas and they think it will be a historical piece. And there was I always wanted it to feel contemporary.
And it's so successful with that feeling. I think that's why people, not that anything was heavy-handed, sort of trying to suggest some direct line to current events, but
I wasn't saying you meant that. I didn't mean that. Because I think I didn't want to do something that felt so specific to our political world and time, because then I thought that's going to maybe limit the scope and the reach of it. Do you know what I mean? So it was Yeah.
Well, I have kept you on the line for longer than I promised, and so I really appreciate it.
Oh no, it's my pleasure. Thank you. I'm so honored to be on this. Thank you. And
no, this is truly my honor. I couldn't believe it when you said yes. I was just like walking on air for like until now. But I was wondering if you would indulge me in ending with the little podcast game of word association. So
yeah, sure.
Okay, great. I'm so excited to hear what you, or maybe not quite you, because I would ask if you would be willing to do the word association game in Riddy's character.
Okay. Well, I hope I can do her justice, and I'm sorry that Aurora's not here because she would undoubtedly be better, but...
Well, maybe she can weigh in at some point.
She'd love to, so I'm sure...
Well, I'll find her on social media.
I told her about this, and she was as excited as me almost, so...
Oh, yeah? Oh, that's so great. So, yeah, if you could get into the Riddy headspace, and she was a character that I, again, still find myself just thinking about as I'm walking around. So I'll say just a few words here, and then, yeah, just tell me what comes to mind, or comes to Riddy's mind.
Okay.
Okay, so the first is the gods.
Hatred. Fuck the gods.
The next is Orpheus.
Tragedy. Am I supposed to be in one-word answers? Am I just giving you a word, or can
No,
I
you can do more. Just whatever just springs to mind first.
So tragedy, and I think cowardice. I think she hates herself for not being able to be honest.
Mom.
Loss. Pain.
Caeneis.
Love. Shy. Quiet. Hope.
And the last is Hades in the sense of the place.
A shit show. And ultimately a terrible lie.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for this. I still can't get over that you agreed to do this podcast, and I can't get over my love for this show. This show has just... I mean, people are just feeling kind of down these days, and this show has just given people in my world something to talk about, something to be excited about. It's just making people excited to approach this material, to teach this material. So I am so grateful to you for bringing this to us.
No, I'm so honored to hear that, and I really, because one of the things I was so nervous about was I wondered what people in your position would think of it. And there was this, because you were making something in a vacuum for a long time and just thinking, oh my God, like, what are people going to think of this? Because you lose all sense of perspective. And I have been so unbelievably thrilled by the reaction from classicists. It's honestly, it's been amazing. So I was so thrilled to be invited on this, and I'm really, thank you very, very much.
No, well, thank you, Charlie. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Lesche podcast. And special thanks for their support of the podcast to Brown University's Department of Classical Studies and the John Carter Brown Center for Advanced Study. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. We look forward to you joining us again soon here in the Lesche.